We're live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It is just after 9:30. We're here California time. We do have Steve Case joining us from the East Coast. Steve, want to raise your hand? There's Steve. Steve's from Brotherhood Mutual. We brought him in kind of at the last minute. We didn't announce him. He's a surprise guest. But Steve, I really appreciate you joining us. Steve is AVP at Brotherhood Mutual. He's of legal. Is that the title, Steve?
Yes. Yep. Good enough.
Okay. Many of you may have met Steve. We did a webinar recently on the Supreme Court cases, and Steve is really on the forefront of trends, and he's that we're seeing in religious organizations. And Steve, I really appreciate you joining us today to give us a little more perspective. We all know Mike Perazzo. Mike has been in board meeting after board meeting and talking with administrator after administrators. They go through these challenges, and of course, everybody knows Cecil from ACSI. And I'm Charlie with Church West. Welcome, everybody. We've had kind of many Lucy in the football moments over the past few weeks. We kind of think we've got things figured out, and the ball gets kind of moved away at the last minute, and we've had a lot of changes as we're trying to reopen schools. You know, nothing like, you know, the week that schools ought to be opening up is when we're really trying to figure this out. And we got schools opening on Tuesday. Some schools have already reopened, and it's been a real challenge. And so I think we want to be here for all of the schools that are participating to answer some of the questions that you have, shed some light on the status of things, talk about the liability coverage that you have, talk about some existing court cases and what the status is of those and what progress may or may not have been made. And so again, thank you all for joining us. But Cecil, let's start with you, my friend. Where are we right now?
I'll tell you what, I'm excited about that. But Charlie, just thinking about it with the administrators, we saw those names yesterday. So I was thinking about many of them last night. And so my thought is this morning, we're going to start this thing off. We're just going to pray for Christian school leaders and boards right now. And we're thankful for all of you that joined. And so I just invite you, Lord, we come into your presence today as we talk through this webinar with school leaders and board members from one end of California to the other. My heart's desire, Lord, is that you will bless, provide, and guide each and every one of them. We pray that you guide them with wisdom from your word. We pray that your spirit will speak to them and move in their hearts. And God, even as some who had signed up for this meeting, but no doubt there's going to be some right now that are on the phone with somebody who's upset or concerned or needs some attention and care. So they're not with us. We just pray that whether they're listening now or they listen to a recording later, that you would guide them personally, directly through the power of your spirit. And Father, we look forward to today where every school is opening in the way that they see is best, and God, students are being blessed and learning as a result. So we give you this time. We thank you for your protection and provision for each school and leader represented today as we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Charlie, if it's okay with you, I want to share, we did get the latest Lucy pulling the ball away from Charlie Brown moment was last Friday when the governor announced the blueprint for a safer economy. For weeks, we have been tracking county by county the 5 metrics that were being measured to allow for reopening to begin. You know, after you were off that list for 14 days, and some of the counties were literally in the middle of that. They were on the second half of that 14-day countdown, and Friday, all of that was upended. I'm going to share a screen. We want to provide a resource to you to kind of summarize what's going on with that. I think this is the right document here. Sorry about that, everybody. We've got it here. I've got all kinds of notifications popping up. Oh, panelists. Okay, so we're good to share. It's telling me, but it's not letting me. Here it is. That's the right one. So Katie is going to be sharing this document in the chat in just a moment, so you can click it and download it. What we did was took the latest guidance called a blueprint for a safer economy. This was issued by the governor last Friday, and did a 1.5-page summary of it with all the links and everything embedded. Every word on this document that you're going to see, none of it's paraphrased, none of it's trying to interpret anything. It's word for word, a overview with all the embedded links, because that document refers back to prior guidance. But what you need to know is that this blueprint for a safer economy replaces the county watch list that doesn't exist anymore. It replaces the 5 different metrics of health and readiness for reopening that were being tracked. It's now been dropped down to 2 things that are being tracked. And here's, in a real quick overview, there are now 4 different levels. This is a county by county measurement. And each county is either at a purple, which means there's a widespread pandemic in that county, to being on a red, to an orange, or the yellow, which is minimal spread of the virus right now. Once and most of the state is in purple, of course, as of last Friday. Most of the state's in purple. I'm going to show you that map in a minute. But you have to be, in order to reopen, you have to be into the red level. So if you're starting in purple, you cannot move to red for 21 days. And then you have to be in the red level for 14 days, 2 weeks. So from last Friday, if you were in purple, what that means is it's going to be 5 weeks from that date before you can open with minimal restrictions. And the minimal restrictions are all the CDC guidelines and your local public health. The one thing that they have not changed is county public health offices are in charge, and they can set guidance and requirements for that county that supersede all of this. And you just want to be aware. So this document you can download. It explains the different levels, what they mean. One of the places you can go to here, this COVID-19, this is where you will go to see, hey, where is my county? And so I'm going to try to share real quickly this. If it's going to allow it to come up, it will not. I got that link shared there now, and it's pulling me up to Zoom. But there is a live map on there. It will give you all statistics for your county on those 2 metrics. So you can track it and you can do the math yourself. You know, it's going to take you 21 days, at least from Friday, but to get to the level of red, and then you have to be in the red level for 2 weeks, 14 days before you're going to be able to start school. What does that mean? Once you're able to start school, then you have to follow the guidance that was previously issued, and we linked on this document to go back. It's a 20-page document, and it's all the stuff that we've been talking about since the beginning of these webinars. It's everything from hand washing and social distance and checking people and measurements as they come onto campus. All of that document is linked right there. You can see it. So that stuff I'm comfortable all of you are aware of. What is brand new is this 4-level color-coded system with the 3 weeks and then the 2-week period of time before you can open. Now you can get waivers for your TK, K through 6th grade programs, and we're actually starting to see more of that happen. Ventura County just issued their first 2 elementary waivers. One of those was an ACSI member school. And so we are having schools that are starting in parts of the state, not all over the state, ready to reopen. We've given you the summary. That's the basic nuts and bolts of the system. You can click on that document and it will give you all the detail that you need. Thank you, Charlie.
No problem. See, so I have a couple of questions though.
Yes.
So we've got a 3-week period. Most of the state is in purple, right? We've got,
yes,
where 95% of the population is in purple at this point.
correct.
Okay. And so we had schools that were going through the waiver process.
Yes.
And they were applying with their local public health authority. They were having conversations. That doesn't matter at this point, does it? It was all reset when the color-coded guidance came up. Is that correct?
This guidance from the governor specifically states that it supersedes all of that system, that old system no longer applies. However, there is a statement in here that really puts the county health officer and the county health department in charge. They're allowed to override, in a sense. They can't change these guidelines. The guidelines are what they are. But if you get a waiver from your local county Department of Health today, that means you can start school tomorrow. So that would supersede this. And so we continue to encourage schools when you're ready to do that, please submit. And the majority of the schools I'm speaking to have submitted their waiver request already, some of them weeks ago.
And the waiver does need to include your plan. It can't just be like, hey, we're doing fine. We went through the waiver application process a couple of weeks ago, and it needs to include, this is what we're doing for social distancing. This is our policy on masks. This is how we're treating people with temperatures, things like that.
Exactly.
So we can point people back to what Mike put together. Gosh, that was before finals, Mike. I think it was in June. It was quite a while ago when we were doing that. And that's the 12-step plan for reopening that is much more specific than what we were able to receive from the state. And it's what was adopted from the Canadian schools. And that was the Canadian plan that is really actionable, 12 steps, and gives you a little bit of flexibility as things change in your area. And one part of it, Mike and I spoke about this yesterday, was about masks. And in the original document, it left flexibility for masks because we didn't know what the requirements were going to be. At this point is the bottom line, masks for all.
Third grade and up, masks.
Okay.
Strongly encouraged for the younger ones. There are some reasons in the guidelines for students to have exemptions. There's a very specific list of exemptions for those third grade and up students. They have asthma, other conditions like that, where the mask would be harmful to them. Other than that, they need to wear it, and your staff needs to wear them all the time.
Okay. And if they're not going through the waiver process and they just say, you know, we're just going to wait it out, which some schools are choosing to do, they're going to do distance learning. And that means that we would be waiting the 3 weeks, which is about to September 19th or so. Is that right?
Yep, 2 weeks from tomorrow, plus then 2 weeks beyond that would be the earliest. So they're another month.
Yeah, that's the key on this, is that it's 3 weeks from the date of this announcement. Then we've got to remain in that better color code, whatever classification, for another 2 weeks. And as long as the case numbers don't spike, as long as the numbers stay okay, then they're going to reopen just as normal, or are they still going to, go ahead.
They're still going to follow that plan. So it doesn't mean all the rules are off. All the guidelines, these plans that they have been developing, those are going to apply, even if they wait the 2 weeks. Now, if they get from the purple down to the red and then stay in the red for 2 weeks, when they reopen, they have to follow all the health guidelines that we've been talking about for, it seems like a year now, but it's been a few months. That's all going to apply.
Okay.
But the good news about that is been a true TK through 12 opening. Whereas right now, the options for opening within the guidelines, you're limited to waivers for TK and K through 6th grade.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the update. I just want to look and see about questions. Mike, it looks like you're monitoring these a little bit on the chat and the Q&A.
I am.
Wow, we've got a great chat moderator to have Mike Perazzo doing that for us. I really appreciate it, Mike.
Yeah,
but if people can put them in the Q&A. I'm sorry?
I'll go ahead and take one of these from Diana. LA County has said that schools should not apply for waivers yet. Is there any update on this? I have not seen any waivers granted for, and I'm assuming that is intended to be Los Angeles County yet. That's my understanding, Diana. As of the last time I checked, Los Angeles County was not even accepting waiver applications.
Okay. So, Mike, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the court cases right now. I know we've talked about things. There's quite a bit of litigation going on right now. Maybe you can bring us up to speed on those items.
Sure. We are keeping Governor Newsom's legal team quite busy. Since the original shutdown, March 19th, there are over 30 lawsuits that have been filed that are in various stages of litigation. Of those, there are about 4 lawsuits that we're actively tracking that involve schools, both in state as well as federal court. There is currently the most high-profile case, one that is pending right now before the California Supreme Court. It's a consolidated action with a number of lawsuits, including lawsuits filed by the Orange County Board of Education, Linfield Christian, Calvary Chapel, San Jose, and Emmanuel Reedley, all of those against Governor Newsom to declare the school portion of the shutdown orders as unconstitutional and a violation of First Amendment free exercise clauses. Just to give you an update on those, the petitions were filed August 21st in the Supreme Court. The oppositions were filed on August 28th. The school's reply briefs were just filed September 1st. It appears as though now the briefing has been completed, and we will be waiting for the Supreme Court to set either a hearing date or take all of the briefs under submission and issue a ruling. Nobody really knows how long that's going to be right now. We haven't received any indication from the California Supreme Court as to what the hearing schedule will be, or when they will issue rulings on these matters. The other case that we're following, of course, is one that I'm involved in as the attorney for Montebello Christian School. We have filed suit against Governor Newsom on behalf of private Christian schools, as well as there are two Jewish schools and a Catholic school. In that case, we just completed the filing, the application for a temporary restraining order to stop Governor Newsom's order from taking effect against private schools. In that case, we have received our hearing date, which we didn't have any control over. Unfortunately, the case went to one judge and then it got transferred to another judge. And so our hearing date has now been set for September 28th. And the defendant's opposition will be filed September 11th, and our reply will be filed on September 18th. And that's really the updated status on the lawsuits that are being filed.
Mike, do you see any progress being made with any of these, or do you see schools being told, go ahead and reopen, or what are you hearing?
No, no judge has yet to declare the school closure order unconstitutional. That's the uphill battle that we're fighting right now. However, a couple of judges at the trial court level, most significantly involving the Emmanuel School in Reedley, have said that they are not going to force schools to close. And the way that these various orders are written by judges depends often on who's bringing the lawsuit. Whether the school or an aggrieved party is trying to sue Governor Newsom, or whether a school is in receipt of a lawsuit naming them as a defendant and trying to bring a temporary restraining order to shut them down. In as much as not many schools have formally opened just yet, we haven't seen too much of the latter, but now as schools start to open, we may very well start to see that. We have to be prepared for and develop strategies on a case-by-case, literally county by county, health director by health director basis to be prepared to respond to those kinds of threats or the actual filing of litigation. What I will tell you is that there are at least 70 schools in Orange County, 70 schools in Orange County that have been granted waivers. Most of them are private schools, but Los Alamitos, 6 of their schools in the Los Alamitos Unified School District have been granted waivers in Orange County. That's a significant number. I can't imagine that any other county is nearly that high, or even that all of the other counties combined would have granted as many waivers as Orange County had. And that came almost directly as a result of the Orange County Public Health Director changing out. There was one health director, she resigned. Another health director came in, Dr. Chow, And since that time, Orange County has been far more active in granting waiver applications.
So, Mike, they're applying for a waiver with the county, and then it still needs to go to the state, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and the state is also approving those for those Orange County schools.
they have. Mhm.
Okay, all right. So there are some that are schools that are receiving waivers. So a lot of those schools are going to be reopening. Many of them opening on Tuesday, correct?
Correct. Yeah, now that's of
Okay.
course, that's a waiver for K through 6. And I believe that no other waivers, insofar as I'm aware, have been granted for anything other than a K through 6 school.
Okay, so there are some schools that are going to be reopening without that waiver. And there are some schools that are going to be reopening that may have the waiver that are going all the way through 12th grade. So the question I have for Steve, right as Steve rolls away, you know,
Perfect
Steve, unmute
timing.
yourself.
I did.
Yeah, there we go. It's lunchtime on the East Coast, so I figured you were getting a snack real quick. No, Steve, some schools are going to be reopening. I mean, that's just, some schools have reopened already. Some schools will be reopening. Tell me what the insurance industry has said about coverage, because that's a big question that we get from somebody. They say, hey, if we reopen, I know Cecil, you've been fielding this question, 24/7. If we reopen and we don't have a waiver, how does liability coverage respond?
Right. And that is like the $1 million question, honestly. And so it does vary quite a bit. And so right off the bat, I need to tell everyone a few things. And that is, one, that no insurance policy is the same. They are vastly different across different companies. And so the language that exists within those policies is very important. Insurance policies are built up of coverage grants, as well as conditions, exclusions, and a number of definitions. And so every word within that policy that's usually 2 inches thick matters. And so whatever we talk about today, it's going to be really important to go back to your insurance agent and ultimately to the insurance company to determine what that coverage actually is. The second point, just generally speaking, is that anytime we talk about coverage, especially with hypothetical or what if scenarios, it's important to understand that coverage is really determined at the time a loss occurs, which means that when that loss occurs, it's dependent on the specific circumstances, the facts that gave rise to the loss, and the policy language that's in effect at the time of that loss. And so, but with all of that said, I mean, I can talk about generally what we're seeing in the industry and what exclusions are extremely relevant at this time. And then I can talk very specifically about what Brotherhood Mutual is doing, because I wrote a lot of that policy language, and we wrote it within our legal department. So having said that, really what it comes down to with these insurance policies is to look at what the exclusions are that are on the policy. So we've seen in the insurance industry, there's been discussion about pollution exclusions and about mold exclusions, believe it or not. A pollution exclusion says, well, is it possible that a virus like COVID-19 is a contaminant? And should that give rise to an exclusion? What we're seeing in the commentary, there are some insurance companies that are maybe discussing that, raising that, but it's unlikely that that type of exclusion would be enforceable. Same thing with a mold exclusion, and you think mold, but really it's because a lot of mold exclusions include what are called microbes, that they exclude any type of microbe that is transferred on surfaces or anything of that nature. And so there's been discussion about whether that exclusion would apply as well. Again, I think most in the insurance industry are saying that those two exclusions would not likely apply, but it's important to talk to your agent about those exclusions if they're on your policy. The big exclusions that are extremely relevant, first is the communicable disease exclusion. So believe it or not, there are quite a few insurance policies that have communicable disease exclusions. Actually, they came about back in 2008, 2009 with H1N1, the swine flu. And so a number of policies have that exclusion. And essentially, what they say is if someone were to contract a virus or bacterial infection on your premises, you would not have liability coverage for that illness. So it's important to go back and look, is there a communicable disease exclusion on your policy? And then the one that's extremely relevant to the question you asked, Charlie, with respect to schools that might be going back without a waiver. There's actually an exclusion that exists on most insurance policies that deals with expected or intended harm and intentional violations of a criminal or penal statute. And what we're seeing being discussed around the insurance industry is if there is a state order or an executive order that prohibits schools from opening and gathering back together, would that criminal statute exclusion or violation of a criminal statute exclusion apply? And we do know of some insurance companies out there that are saying that that exclusion would likely apply to bar coverage. And what that means, if that exclusion applies, not only is it barring coverage if there's any liability that comes from an infection or a spread of the coronavirus, but it's also being interpreted to prohibit coverage for slip and falls or injuries that occur on the premises if you are opened in violation of a criminal law. And I will say it's very important to go back to your policy and see what that exclusion actually says. Because if it's saying violation of a penal statute, ordinance, civil order, things of that nature, then it's possible that it could apply to bar coverage for your school. Now, I can say, again, because I work for Brotherhood Mutual, our exclusion states that you have a bar for the violation of a criminal statute. The way that we've reviewed this and talking with California attorneys is that the governor's executive order does not constitute a criminal statute because it wasn't passed by a legislative body. And therefore, we don't believe that that exclusion is likely to apply for our insureds. So under our policy, we don't have a communicable disease exclusion currently, and we don't have the criminal statute exclusion that would bar coverage. Now, having said that, and I think we all know that, that if schools are weighing this to gather potentially without the waiver, we all want to do it in a smart and a wise manner, following CDC guidelines, health department guidelines, and being safe for the students and the faculty. And that's what we would encourage. But that's what we're seeing with the insurance industry is that there are a number of exclusions in play. And it's important to go back, look at that language, talk with your agent, and figure out what the risks of liability are and the exposure from an insurance perspective if you go back without a waiver.
So thank you very much for that. But the insurance industry in general is saying if you reopen without a waiver or without waiting the 3 weeks plus 2 weeks plus any other additions that go on beyond that, that you wouldn't have coverage for a COVID-related claim or a maybe possibly any other general liability claim. But Brotherhood doesn't have those exclusions, and we're trying to go through the normal process. We're doing safeguards. We're doing all the right common sense things that we've been talking about for so long. But that exclusion isn't in there on the Brotherhood policy, right?
Yeah, it's not in there to the degree that you would see in other insurance policies. And I should say, we do know of some insurance companies that have kind of stated that position that there's not likely to be coverage because of that exclusion. But I will say that most of the insurance industry has actually remained silent. They're really wanting to take a wait and see approach. And that's why it's important to go back and ask your agent or to review that policy language, because otherwise you're going into it blind and you're just not sure.
Okay, so let's say I'm the Speaker of the House and I want to get a wash and blow dry of my hair, okay? And I go into a beauty salon in San Francisco where there's a lockdown, and they have opened up for me. And I go in, and as I'm walking from the wash section to the blow section, and I slip and fall, nothing to do with COVID, but I'm injured. A lot of the insurance policies wouldn't respond. Am I correct?
Yeah, if they're interpreting that criminal
Yeah.
statute exclusion to say that was a willful violation of a criminal statute, so then anything flowing from that, directly or indirectly related to that statute, is not going to be covered.
Okay. And I just thought of that analogy as I was going through it, and so I don't want to offend anybody.
Very good hypothetical.
Okay. And she made it safely, which is great, and you know that's good. So, okay, cool. So all of you guys, I want to ask you, our options right now, again, are to remain closed, wait for the process. The other one is to go through the application process for the waiver. And then the others are just like reopen and go for it. And that's really what most schools are being faced with right now, correct? Okay, so I'd like to address some of the questions because we've got quite a few that have come in here right now. And one of the questions that I got here for you, Mike, specifically, but is it a surprise to you that waivers are being approved?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not a surprise that they're being approved in Orange County. Overall, it is. And I did not expect any waivers to be approved when they first came out. I thought the waiver part of the governor's original order was incomplete. It was vague. There was no process. There was no standard of review. There was no form. There was no application criteria. It was all pretty vague, and it didn't look like they would be granted because of the fact that the waivers would have to go through Sacramento for final approval. They could not be done on a local county level, and it appeared to me that firewall was put into place to prevent some counties from going rogue. But sure enough, Orange County has approved over 70, and all of those were approved with state approval or at least state review and approval as well. So it was a surprise that any of them have been approved. A good surprise, but a surprise, and not surprising at all that Orange County has had the most, just because Orange County has been pretty aggressive at various levels in terms of challenging the governor's orders.
Charlie, it might be helpful for folks to know, Katie has shared in the chat the link that gives you the list of all the submitted and approved waiver requests for California. So you can see those yourself and just see how schools in your area, how many have been submitted, how many, if any, have been approved.
Yep. Okay. Some schools right now aren't reopening, but what they are doing is they're doing distance learning centers. And we've had many schools, and you know, we've had a lot of churches that have contacted us saying, you know, we've got employees that have kids that are learning from home. We're being impacted in our office. We've got a lot of that happening. Has there been any clarity on the guidelines for that recently, Cecil or Mike?
Yes.
Yes, there has, and we've received a couple of court decisions on church reopenings. We believe a lot of the legal issues with regard to church reopenings are analogous to school reopenings, but in the church cases, and there are probably at least 20 or 30, over 20 challenges in church cases to Governor Newsom's shutdown orders, not been faring very well in the courts. The courts have generally been ruling that the governor indeed has plenary authority under the Emergency Powers Act to address and shut down operations in the state, including churches, in order to stem the spread of the virus. So we lost a case that started in San Diego that went out all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, where Justice Roberts provided the swing vote in a 5-4 decision that said that the governor's plenary authority to deal with the pandemic on balance overcame the First Amendment protection rights, and further that the exercise of religious freedom was not completely stopped in those instances, but rather was restricted to prevent in-person in-church gatherings. So that's it. The other case though that we're following in that regard is, interestingly enough, the John MacArthur case, which continues to unfold on an every Sunday basis. There, a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge said that while he did not conclude that the governor's order was unconstitutional, he stopped short of ordering law enforcement to go into the church and shut it down. And so, since law enforcement has no authority under this judge's order in Los Angeles County to shut down, physically shut down the church at Grace in Sun Valley, John MacArthur's continued to preach on Sunday mornings, and nobody's doing anything to stop him.
So when a school or a church says, let's bring together 20 kids or 10 kids and put them in a room and have them do distance learning, these distance learning centers, are they able to do that right now, Mike?
That's the question, Charlie. When you say, are they able to do it? My answer has to be, they would do so at some risk. They would do so at some risk of being, of another effort to shut them down.
But my assumption here is that the risk is pretty small. We're not seeing the enforcement, and you're not having school. You're not opening up a preschool. You're not opening up childcare. You're getting a group together, and you're providing a real need right now, which is serving the families so that the families can get back to, or the parents can get back to work, and providing that supervision for them.
Correct. So the question is, in each one of these cases, Charlie, how will the local county officers react to that kind of a program? Okay, and just to give you, one anecdotal example. In one county, the county health director very publicly said that the program that you're describing was a guise for school. And, verbally suggested the school needs to cease those operations. And then 24 hours reversed and said it's okay.
It is good to know, Charlie. I'm just going to, there are guidelines from the statement that the governor made. If you go to that document that we provided to them, the very last word on it says source, and you click on that, it takes you to the information, the actual order with the guidelines. It includes cohort orders and things like that to describe the details under which those kinds of programs can be offered. And it's interesting to note that public school districts are offering those programs. The YMCA and other organizations like that, Boys and Girls Clubs, they're offering these kinds of programs around the state, full-time in many cases, because they realize kids are at home and childcare is needed. So you'll go from that document, read the guidelines, and then it will take you back to, many of you have seen this document that's related to private schools that we'll see on here, but this is the actual document that's linked within that guidance for providing childcare. So there's cohort issues you need to be aware of, keeping staff and the same students together all the time, not intermixing groups. There are ratios that are involved. Any of you that have a community care license understand ratios. There's specific weight ratios that apply to childcare. So just be aware of the details and follow those if that is an option that you're considering. Certainly, there are schools around the state that are doing this, that are not having the difficulty that some have been, but they've actually been closed down. But it will be a problem if you're not following recommended health guidelines. It'll be a problem for you, potentially with the health department, but certainly with your insurance company. If an issue comes up, you want to make sure you're following the rules and operating safely. But the great news is, when there's specific rules laid out by the government, I think Mike would agree and Steve would agree, that leads that in some cases the government has tacitly admitted that that's appropriate as long as you're following those guidelines, subject to a local county health officer's order.
Yes, I would agree, Cecil, and you'll even recall that way back after July 17th, when the first school closure order came out, I was talking pretty early on about what I was calling then a pod type approach. Now the terminology cohorting has come into the vernacular. It was included in the first 12-point program that we talked about, trying to do as much cohorting as possible, that we wrote based on the conclusions of the Safe Kids Hospital up in Toronto and their pediatric department that was advocating in Canada for the reopening of all public schools for in-person learning. So we've been talking about this pod cohorting kind of approach for a month and a half now, and I'm sort of happy to see at least that, you know, we're given little windows of opportunity through which we might try to wedge into to appropriately and even legally reopen in some fashion for on-campus care and even some learning. Although that also raises a lot of constitutional issues, because what happened, at least in the one case that I mentioned earlier, is that the county health official came onto campus and said, well, this really looks like school and you can't do that because I see kids learning in the classroom. Well, the whole point of private schools is the state cannot take any action against the content of what you are teaching. You can't take action against the content of what you are teaching. That is a violation of the First Amendment free exercise of religion clause. And I think that's problematic, which is why I'm not surprised that in that particular instance, also in line with the guidance that was issued a couple of days ago, that official, you know, reversed the decision, and the cohorting concept was allowed to be implemented and implemented for a compelling state reason, which is parents need to go to work. And if they do, kids need to be watched. They can't be left home alone. They need a place to go.
And I want to tell people one thing we really want to be careful of is that if you have a licensed preschool as part of your school or your ministry, you want to have that conversation with licensing, because in some areas we've seen licensing saying, oh, that's great, go for it. You know, open up these, you know, learning centers. That's fantastic. It's separate from the school. It's clearly separate from the school. Other people in licensing have come in and said, wait a second, you're trying to fudge your numbers a little bit and, you know, bump it up and bump up some revenue and take advantage of this opportunity. So what you really want to have those conversations, because that could be difficult to go through if you have licensing get upset with you. Steve, I know when I was back in Fort Wayne, and it was lovely in Fort Wayne last week.
Yeah.
It's perfect weather in Fort Wayne, Indiana. When we were back there, we were talking about this with some of the underwriters about what schools, ministries ought to be doing if they're setting up a distance learning center. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's a lot of maybe what's already been said, but going into a cohort that satisfies social distancing. You know, we've helped a number of schools navigate back to school across the country. There are quite a few Christian schools back. And so, you know, the use of plexiglass in the classroom or in that area is always a benefit. Whenever you're talking about distance learning, the attorney in me always jumps to privacy issues. and just making sure that you're working very closely with an IT department to make sure that you have the right privacy settings on Zoom or whatever platform you're using, so that you are protecting the student's privacy. That's huge. You know, there's something else that I think is really important, because we've seen some schools kind of have some missteps in launching back, and that is schools wanting to make sure that they can do it the right way, that they're following the social distancing, that they're recognizing symptoms and things of that nature. We had one school that within a week of them being back, they were down to 50% student capacity. And the reason being is they had a list of about 15 or 20 symptoms that they allowed the students to self-identify and withdraw themselves to move into 14-day quarantine. I mean, they had, if a student was had fatigue, headache, runny nose, that one presentation of a symptom, the school said 14-day quarantine. So it took 5 days for them to be at 50% capacity when they got back together. So you want to balance that, doing it the right way, but also making sure that you can still function when you do get back, whether it be distance learning or whether it be in-person instruction.
What I want to make sure of is that we're doing the regular screening that we would always do. You know, as we kind of shift our ministries quickly and we try to create something quickly, we're sometimes scrambling for employees or volunteers, and I want to make sure that you've got them all screened properly and we've got the appropriate people. And so those are the kind of things that we go through. Hey, let me go through some of these questions here. Got one from hey, Terry Cutter. This is one of the guidelines for reopening requires employees to be tested every 2 months. We are struggling with finding a testing center that will bill individual insurance carriers and getting the confirmation from the insurance company they will pay for the test. I want to tell you, this afternoon, we have another webinar, because I know we aren't getting enough lately, but we have another webinar that's going to be on a testing service. We've been using it with some of the college ministries and how they're going through the testing process for students as they're bringing them back. But it can be applied to schools, it can be applied to ministries, and it's we're using it in our office. We purchased some of these. I think they're $150 a piece or so. And if somebody comes down with the people that work in that have had interactions with them, we're just paying for the tests, and we get test results back in 48 hours. That's because we had other people that were trying to get tests, and it was taking 10 days to get results back. And so, but I'd encourage you, we'll send something out to everybody that's on this webinar about the afternoon one, so you can at least register for it and get the information on it. But we're working with MedCall advisors to develop this rapid testing program. So, but yeah, we're working through that with you, Terry.
Hey, Charlie, just to add to
yes,
that,
sir.
because that's a good point. There's private solutions for those things, but they obviously come at a cost. We did have a school in Walnut Creek, California, Contra Costa County, I believe, that was going through lots of research to check out their options, and they were coming out with things that were going to be cost prohibitive. The way they were going to approach this is test half of their faculty and staff each month. So they were kind of spreading the cost out, but making sure they were meeting the requirement of every 2-month testing. In the process of looking at all these options, ultimately somebody on their leadership team got a hold of the county public health office that had a location across the street from the school, as the story was shared with me, and just asked them what options are out there. And they explained that there are something like 12 or 14 testing sites around that county, that teachers, people that are working at schools are considered essential for that purpose of testing. And so it would be covered 100%. They would be asked for their insurance information, and the county would attempt to bill the insurance company, but the testing would be provided in any event without charge to the individual school employees by the county. And it was a very quick, I don't think it was a 48-hour turnaround, but it was it wasn't wait for 2 weeks kind of thing. So I would encourage folks to touch base with your local county public health department, because they may have some free good options for you that you could take advantage of as essential workers.
Okay. And I'll find out this afternoon if MedCall is able to bill the insurance provider, because they're a medical practice, and so I would assume so, but we'll find out. And Terry, we'll get back to you directly on that. Hey, Mike, this is a tough one. This is some Christian schools in LA have opened for in-person learning this Monday. They said that public schools can reopen for in-person learning for a select group of special needs students. Are Christian schools able to do the same?
Yes, and we are aware of several Christian schools. There aren't too many schools that really specialize in providing services to special needs kids. But for those that do provide those services who have applied for waivers, they've been granted. Yes.
Okay. Okay, let's go through some of these. Testing regularly. Here's a question. Is there an option for a teacher to decline testing for privacy reasons?
Certainly they would be welcome to do that and to exercise that right. I'm not sure what the effect of that would be. There is a lot of concern about not only tests, but potential vaccines. Some of the vaccines now that are being developed, that are in phase 3 clinical trials, are carrying markers with them, and for that reason alone, a lot of people are saying, I'm not gonna participate in that kind of vaccination program if they can follow me around, and what kind of information are they going to get? And that same concern is being raised about testing as well. That people should be given the option of opting out of that. Now one of the results of opting out of that kind of testing may be that you can't come onto campus.
Okay. Mark asked this question. He said, do you imagine there may be a waiver plan for secondary schools in the next 4 to 8 weeks? I don't think so. I think we're going to have to get through the color-coded system and then an additional 2 weeks once we've been in the red. So that I don't think there's going to be that waiver plan. But we don't know. Like we say, that it changes every couple of weeks. So,
yeah. Or alternatively, there could be a waiver plan for K through 12, 15 minutes after we get off this webinar.
Yeah.
And I wish I was joking.
Huh? Beth had asked, the 14 cohort guidance is an interesting document for really small schools, which I agree with that. I think can be good. Let's see. Our school's operating under distance learning with childcare on campus, and they received approval on that. Or should we approve a waiver, or stay with what we have?
Stay with what you got.
Okay.
I mean, there's now probably no harm in applying for a waiver. Before, we were kind of suggesting to clients as well as folks on the webinars that, we were trying to build a bridge to the start of school so that you didn't get shut down prematurely. Applying for a waiver and getting a rejection of that waiver would be, a second order to close, in addition to the governor's original order to close. That's not good. Now what we're seeing is that there have been a lot of waivers, waiver applications that have resulted in a county saying, instead of rejecting it or saying no, and them saying, you know what, we're going to process this further. And that's not a bad reaction, okay? And depending on how the counties have been saying no, we're going to process it further, they usually give some indication as to whether you submitting additional information will be of any help at all. And in a lot of circumstances, it may not be. For example, if you apply for a waiver for a K through 12 school, we've seen some people do that, and the county come back and say, we're going to need some more information. We're going to need to process this further. They could have said no, simply on the grounds that you're a K through 12 school, and we're not going to do that. They also could have said we can approve it conditionally, but only upon or only as respects your K through 6 program. All right, and we reject it on the 7 through 12 grades. But they're not doing that. They're instead sort of punting those kinds of applications down the road. So I don't think it's risky now. If you've been waiting to submit your waiver application, go ahead and do so. I don't think, as I did maybe 6-8 weeks ago, that there was as much to lose now as there was then.
Okay. Let me go through some of these. Here's a question for you, Steve Case. Can a school or should a school make accommodations for employees, families, students who claim themselves as conscientious objectors to current mask mandates?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I will defer to Mike in a second because it does come down to what the state has allowed to be exemptions. Usually the exemptions are with respect to health issues. I'm not sure if there's conscientious objectors. I will say on that front though, just this week within the last 2 days, we've had one of our insureds out of Oregon and one of our insureds out of Michigan have OSHA inspections. And we're starting to see, and I don't know if this is happening in California, we're starting to see that OSHA is seeking to enforce some of these mask mandates. And so 2 of our insureds have been hit with violations of the mask mandates. One's a school. And what's happening though is these inspectors, they don't know if a student or a faculty member has a justifiable, excusable reason to not be wearing a mask under the state law, but they're still flagging it as a violation. And so then in most states, there's an OSHA complaint that's filed, potentially a fine, and worst case scenario is they're shut back down after opening. And so it's pretty tough. I know there was another question that came through that said, can teachers take their masks off during recess if they're socially distant? And I have to say, it does come down to state law and what the state and county are stating those exceptions are. Mike, do you have anything?
Yeah, I agree with that. Of course, we've now shifted our advice to where, again, going back to July 17th, and the guidance that we're receiving from medical professionals was that it was a lot more uncertain about wearing masks specifically back then. Now we're just saying, look, just make it mandatory for teachers and students over that certain age level to wear masks. And yeah, we've also heard about the in a couple of cases, Cal OSHA starting to make some rumblings, but I think we've heard a couple of phone calls from Cal OSHA on schools that had opened, and one case where we got a letter and we're preparing an appropriate response to that. And the response is basically, hey, look, we're gonna comply as much as possible with the governor's order. Can we promise and guarantee 100% mask wearing all the time around every school with every student and every teacher and every parent that comes onto campus? No, but we're going to do our best to substantially comply. And as of right now, our protocols call for mask wearing being mandatory around campus.
Okay. Let me ask regarding testing here. Steve, what do you think? Do schools need to keep a hard copy record of teacher staff testing results throughout the year?
Yeah, I mean, from a document retention perspective, it's a good idea. I mean, you don't know what type of enforcement element is going to be in play from the state. Are they going to try to do an audit of various schools and say, okay, confirm with us that you're doing the testing and that you've taken the appropriate steps? So from a best practice perspective, I would say to retain those copies. Now, there's a number of privacy issues at play because those are medical records now. And so you want to make sure that those are kept secure and remain private, and really they're only pulled out if necessary. There might be other ways in which to document that a test was taken, but I don't know if the state is requiring that you need evidence of a negative test. That's going to come down at the state level.
Whatever test results you have, protect them. That's one of the things that I look at is, we want to make sure that we're protecting all of those things. Let's go through a couple more. I know we all have access to the questions, but let's just take a look here. Sorry, I want to make sure that I'm addressing them. Distance learning, we answered that one. What level of concern is there in the not clearly defined health equity mandate of the color-coded system? Not sure about that. The health equity mandate? I'm not sure the question there, Renee. Cecil, you're on mute, but I hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not tracking. I'm not sure what they're asking. So if they want to
Okay.
Clarify what they're asking, we'll get them that information.
Okay, and then are there any new HR documents that I need to provide employees with, or changes that I need to make to comply with HR-related COVID laws? I don't know. Mike, any thoughts on that?
Wait a second. I'm sorry. I was reading another one. Charlie, what was that again?
It's okay. As an employer, what, if any, new HR documents do I need to provide employees with, or changes that I need to make to comply with HR-related COVID laws?
Wow, yeah, that's pretty broad, and I'm not sure I can give an answer to that. What I would comment on is that, you know, schools have a long history of requiring certain tests like tuberculosis tests for staff and things like that. And I wouldn't see this kind of thing as any different from that. Obviously, it is confidential to each employee, other than having to deal with it if a test comes back positive and then, you know, they're removed, but you don't have to, you know, broadcast that to the school community specifically. So it seems to me from an HR perspective that this testing would be not dissimilar from any other kind of testing that teachers have to do in order to come onto any campus and work with kids. So you keep it confidential, just like you would any other medical record of any of your staff.
Okay, I know we've been, oh, Kathy, why'd you have to ask this question? How does cohorting work with labor laws for breaks for staff and lunch? Remember AB5 was the big issue back in January and February, and we were all so worried about it. But, you know, Kathy, you still have to follow the same labor laws for breaks for staff and lunch, and nothing's changing on that. I know we're putting together kind of an HR webinar in a couple of weeks with Leslie DiMattia, and we'll be addressing a lot of these COVID HR issues as well. Let's see. Emmanuel asked, please share the 12 steps document. Emmanuel, I'll answer it here, but I'll have a link on the website, and there's a webinar that goes with it. There's a lot of relevant links on there. Let me just take a quick look here. Michelle Mott said, our school offers TK to 12 distance learning camps under the day camp and cohort guidance. No in-person teaching going on. Happy to share our plan with anyone. Michelle, send it to me. I'd love to send it out. I'd be glad to on that one. Cecil, where's Michelle from?
Is this Michelle Mott?
Yes.
Central California. I want to say Stockton, but I forget. Big Valley. Big Valley. Thank you. Big Valley.
All right. All right. Good.
I was going to jump in, but I will give a little shout out to Michelle. And Michelle, what you've done there is excellent, by the way, and would be good for anyone to follow. Thank you for offering that up.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And yeah, that's great, Michelle. And I want to tell you that as you develop your plans, I want you to also send them to an attorney to review them. You know, a lot of are coming to us. We're giving risk management guidance, but a lot of these things, I think you need to send it to an attorney, pay them to review it. Brotherhood has legal assistance, which is free, but I really think it's important that you take that next level before you reopen and run it by your attorney, pay them to do it, and so you can get their opinion and really get some insight on it. I know a guy, Mike, smile.
I'm trying.
No, come on, Mike. You know, you
No,
are
I
needed
know.
in a time like this. You've been such a.
This is why nobody wants lawyers on these kind of things, and you know, until you need one. So, but thank you. Yeah, I'd be happy to take a
You're a
look.
delightful guy, and
Yeah, and
I don't want people to think you're salty at all here, Mike. You know, you're great. I mean, he and I will have long conversations. Cecil, Mike, and I get together on a regular basis. Steve, we're going to have you come together too on these Zoom calls in the evening, saying, "Did you see this court ruling?" or blah 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 blah.
I
really appreciate
it. Used to be
it.
a really nice guy before March 19th, but but in all seriousness, every school at some point in time is going to reopen, and every school has to have a written reopening plan. That is a
Yeah.
non-negotiable. You can't just reopen without some kind of written document that says, here's what we're going to do about mask wearing, hand sanitization, social distancing, and screening. Okay, so our 12-point program is one example of a way to go for that. It's virtually complete, but it would be dependent on your local circumstances as well as updated guidance that we receive from the state of California. But you got to have a written plan, and then you got to follow it once you do reopen. That would, without having a plan and without following it, that'd be the easiest way for a county to shut you down or try to shut you down.
Absolutely. And while I'm giving shout outs, I'll also talk about the resources that ACSI provides. Fantastic resource, fellowship, support that you get from Cecil, and actually Brotherhood Mutual customers. You almost get a little help. When I mention to an underwriter, I go, "Oh, it's an ACSI school." They're like, "Okay." There's a lot of credibility with that. You guys run a first-rate organization, Cecil. We appreciate you. Steve Case, you guys aren't so bad at Brotherhood. We appreciate you coming out with really broad liability coverage, and we're privileged here at Church West to represent you very well. And I appreciate all that you've done for us and the ministries that we serve. So, and the ministries that are with Brotherhood, great. The ones that aren't, we're here for you. Appreciate all of you guys coming on here. Any final words from any one of you here?
Yeah, we take very seriously the spiritual ministry that each one of these schools has in the life of their kids. We're committed to praying for our school leaders, member schools, and those that aren't member schools, as we want kids to be safe, your faculty, staff, and school communities to be safe. And we know that you're working really, really hard. And faculty members, I'm sure, like leaders, are working harder than they ever had to do a good job on behalf of kids. So we're thankful for that. We want you to know we're praying for you regularly. And we're here if you have a question. Please email or call.
Okay. All right. I'll go through the questions again, the Q&A. We might address some if I've missed any, and we'll email them out. We'll be sending a resource out this afternoon. The recording tends to get, takes a couple of hours to process, and we'll get that posted as well and sent out to everybody. And again, this afternoon, we put it in the chat, the link to the medical testing for reopening. I'd encourage you to sign up for that and learn about some of the options that are available. This has been the most convenient one. It's been tested for some of the colleges that are bringing their students back, and it can easily translate to schools. And so we've got a good partnership there. So, okay. All right. Hey, thank you all for taking the time, joining us. Steve, appreciate you joining us last minute. Really appreciate your insight. Mike, as always, and Cecil, you've been great. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.